All right, let's dive into one of the most intense and honestly difficult chapters in the book of Numbers. Our goal here is pretty simple. We're going to walk through this story verse by verse and build it in our minds in a way that's so clear, so cinematic, you just can't forget it. Ready? Let's get into it. So, our whole story plays out in 5 main parts. It all starts with a divine command. That leads right into the battle for vengeance, which is then followed by a pretty shocking moment of fiery anger from Moses. After that, things get really meticulous with the purifying of the spoils, and it all wraps up with a surprising offering of gold. That's the roadmap. Let's start at the beginning. Okay, Act 1. The whole thing kicks off with a voice, an order given to a man who is at the very end of his long, long journey. And you can feel the weight of this. This isn't just another task. This is the last one. And the Lord spoke to Moses. Picture Moses, maybe 120 years old, standing and listening. Then verse 2 hits with this 1-2 punch. First, the mission. Take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Then the second part, which makes it so personal and final. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. Basically, do this and then your time is done. Moses doesn't hesitate. In verse 3, he turns to the people and says, "Arm some of yourselves for war." You can just imagine the sounds of the camp suddenly shifting, the clang of swords, the rustle of men getting ready. Verse 4 gets specific. Send 1,000 from each tribe to the war. Imagine a command going out to the camps of Reuben, Judah, Dan, all 12. And sure enough, verse 5 says 12,000 men are mustered. And here's a really key detail in verse 6. Phinehas, the priest, goes with them. But get this, he's not just carrying a spear. He's carrying the holy articles from the sanctuary and the silver trumpets used to sound the charge. Act 2. The army is ready. The priest is with them. The trumpets are polished. And now, the mission is carried out with a terrifying, absolute efficiency. Verse 7 gives us the brutal bottom line. They warred against Midian as the Lord commanded Moses, and they killed every male. It was a swift, overwhelming attack. Then, verse 8 zooms in on the details. Picture 5 crowns falling in the dust as the 5 kings of Midian, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, are all cut down. And then there's one more casualty mentioned by name. Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword. The famous prophet who tried to curse Israel meets his end right here. So what happens after the battle? Verse 9 tells us the army captures the women and children and takes all the livestock and wealth. Verse 10 paints this really stark picture. They burned all their cities and all their forts with fire. Just imagine columns of black smoke filling the sky for miles around. And verse 11 just sums it all up. They took all the spoil and all the booty, both of man and of beast. Now, see the army returning in verse 12. This would have been an incredible sight. A massive procession of 12,000 victorious soldiers, herding countless animals and leading a long, somber line of captives, all marching back toward the Israelite camp in the plains of Moab. Okay, Act 3. You'd expect a hero's welcome, right? Celebration, feasting. But that is not what happens. The story takes a hard left turn here, from victory right into fury. In verse 13, Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the people go out of the camp to meet them. Imagine their faces, ready to greet their victorious army. But in verse 14, something is terribly wrong. Moses was angry with the officers of the army. His face just darkens as he sees the procession and specifically who is in it. And then, in verse 15, his anger just explodes. It cuts through the noise of the returning army with this one sharp, furious question. Have you kept all the women alive? You can imagine the commanders just freezing, stunned into silence. Verse 16 explains why he's so enraged. He points to the Midianite women and says, look, these were the ones who, on Balaam's advice, caused the people of Israel to sin against the Lord in the incident at Peor. He's connecting this victory to a past spiritual disaster. And that leads to a new, terrible command in verse 17. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man intimately. Then comes the exception in verse 18. But all the young girls who have not known a man, you may keep alive for yourselves. After all that, there's a need for purification. In verse 19, Moses orders the soldiers, encamp outside the camp for 7 days. Verse 20 explains they have to purify themselves, their captives, and every single thing they're wearing or carrying, garments, leather, anything made of goat hair or wood. Then, in verse 21, Eleazar the priest steps forward. In verses 22 and 23, he lays out the rules for the plunder itself. Imagine two lines forming. One line is for metal objects, gold, silver, bronze, that can take the heat. They must pass through fire. The other line is for everything else, and it has to pass through water. Finally, verse 24 gives the last step. On the seventh day, they wash their clothes, and only then can they come back into the main camp. So now we're in Act 4. The chaos of battle is over, the rituals are underway, and the whole mood shifts from this intense emotional conflict to the cold, hard, precise world of accounting. In verse 25, the Lord speaks to Moses again. The command, in verse 26, is to take a complete count of all the plunder, every person, every animal. And then verse 27 gives the first and most important rule. Just picture all the spoils of war gathered in one massive pile, and a line is drawn right down the middle. 50% for the soldiers who fought the battle, and the other 50% for the rest of the community back at camp. Perfectly equal halves. Now, from each of those two giant piles, a tax or a tribute has to be paid. Verse 28 says that from the soldiers' half, they have to set aside 1 out of every 500 captives and animals for the priests. Just a tiny slice. Verse 29 says that goes to Eleazar. But now look at verse 30. From the congregation's half, they have to take 1 out of every 50. That's a much bigger portion, 10 times bigger in fact, and give that to the Levites who take care of the tabernacle. Verse 31 just confirms that Moses and Eleazar did exactly what God commanded. So just how much stuff are we talking about here? Verses 32, 33, and 34 give us the jaw-dropping totals. Try to picture this. A sea of 675,000 sheep, then add 72,000 cattle, and on top of that, 61,000 donkeys. The sheer scale is just immense. Let's follow the math. Verse 35 first tells us there were 32,000 virgin girls in total. Now let's look at the soldiers' half, which is broken down in verses 36 through 40. They get 337,500 sheep, and from that, the priest's tribute, the 1 in 500 part, is 675. They get 36,000 cattle, the tribute is 72. They get 30,500 donkeys, the tribute is 61. And from their half of the captives, 16,000 persons, the tribute for the priests is just 32 people. And verse 41 says Moses gave that portion directly to Eleazar the priest. Now for the other side of the ledger. Verses 42 through 46 lay out the congregation's half. And the starting numbers are exactly the same. But as verse 47 shows, their tax rate was 1 in 50, not 1 in 500. So the Levites' portion is 10 times larger. They get 6,750 sheep, 720 cattle, 610 donkeys, and 320 persons. And that brings us to Act 5. After all the brutality and the bean counting, the story takes one last, really unexpected turn. This final scene isn't about following orders or paying taxes. It's about something completely voluntary. In verse 48, the army officers, the commanders of thousands and hundreds, come before Moses. And in verse 49, they deliver this absolutely incredible report. You can just hear the awe in their voices as they say, "Your servants have taken a census of the men of war under our command, and not one man of us is missing." Out of 12,000 soldiers in a brutal war, they had 0 casualties. And because of this miracle, look at their response in verse 50. They say, "We have brought the Lord's offering, articles of gold, armlets and bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and necklaces to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord." Picture these tough military commanders taking off their own personal gold jewelry, the spoils they'd claimed for themselves, and presenting it as a gift. Verse 51 tells us Moses and Eleazar accept the gold, and verse 52 gives us the total weight, 16,750 shekels. That's a massive amount of gold. Verse 53 makes a point to say that every regular soldier had already taken plunder for himself. This was a special extra offering just from the officers. And verse 54 tells us its final destiny. The gold was brought into the tabernacle as a memorial for the people of Israel before the Lord, a permanent reminder of their impossible total preservation. And that's where the chapter ends. It's a journey that goes from a divine command for vengeance through horrific violence into incredibly detailed accounting. And it finishes with this beautiful, spontaneous act of gratitude for miraculous protection. So the question that just hangs in the air is this: how does an account of such total destruction end with such a profound offering of thanks? What does a story like this ask us to remember?